give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Listen to them, the children of the night. What podcasts they make. Hello, ghouls and goblins. I don't host radio, but I do host podcasts. Or should I say, ghost? This is Bride of Alternate Ending, and I am your ghost, Brennan Klein. How many co-ghosts do I have? One. Ha, ha, ha. And that co-ghost is Tim Brayton. How are you doing, Tim?
I'll be so happy when October is over. I can't even begin to tell you. I'm doing so well. How are you doing, Brennan?
I'm doing great.
Are you confident that is the case?
Yeah, no, not at all. I feel like my body's falling apart today. My body and my brain. I don't know if you could tell.
I could guess, yes.
But we are here to close out the month of October for Alternate Ending. This episode's coming out 4 days before Halloween. We're not recording it 4 days before Halloween. Little spoiler. So we got a little bit more time than you, the unfortunate listeners, do. But we wanted to kind of swing back around and cover a horror or quote-unquote horror classic that Tim has not seen, which incidentally is also one that I have not seen. But the patrons voted for us to talk about the 1990 Adrian Lyne movie, Jacob's Ladder. So, how are you feeling about that?
I'm feeling good about that. I want to begin, not to spoil things, and maybe not even to immediately just dive into contentious matters, although given that you said quote-unquote, I don't think I am. I find it interesting that the theme of the month was that you and I were both going to watch a major horror classic that we had never seen before. And we managed to watch two movies that aren't horror movies. Either of them.
Yeah, one of them is a melodrama, which was what we watched last time, which was Freaks. And this one is...
It's a psychological study about PTSD and America's failure to reckon with vets returning from Vietnam.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's basically Forrest Gump.
Oh God. Yeah, well, okay, so I don't think there's a way to talk about Jacob's Ladder without spoiling Jacob's Ladder. So do you disagree with me? Should we try?
I think we could at least lay down the plot, but I don't feel it would be interesting to do so. I feel the thing is, everyone only knows one thing about Jacob's Ladder if they haven't seen it, and it's how it ends.
Yeah, which is, I knew that going in.
I knew it more or less as well. I also can't shake the feeling it did not always... The twist ending, I don't think was always a twist. I think there had to have been a point in this film's development where that was information given to us much, much earlier, because the film doesn't really try to hide it very much.
It's not putting in any effort to make it a twist.
So I think we should just bite the bullet and say, yes, we are going to talk about the end of Jacob's Ladder. Although I think we should just quickly, for those who do want to tap out rather than hear that, I think it would be at least useful for us to give a quick little, did you like it, did you not like it summmer to start.
Do you want to start? Because this is your...
Because this is my movie. So I will say this. Not a horror movie. I've already said that. I think there are horror-adjacent things going on. There's a monster. There's some creepy psychological effects. But this does not even feel in the way that the phrase psychological thriller sometimes gets used to disguise studio films that are actually horror movies. For example, the year after this, The Silence of the Lambs, horror movie through and through. Do we call it that? No, because the studio is embarrassed by it. Same studio, in fact. But this is not. It's a character drama that pulls in horror to make thematic points. But that being said, as a character drama about what happens to people who come back to the United States from fighting in Vietnam, I think it's quite good. I think Tim Robbins, who plays Jacob, whose ladder this is, one of the best performances I've ever seen him give, and I consider myself a Robbins fan, so that's high praise indeed. I'm also going to immediately put down the marker. This is the first Adrian Lyne film I have ever seen that I liked.
Really? Oh, that you've liked.
That I've liked.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That makes more sense. Okay.
No, actually, I think as of this film, I think I've seen all of the like important Lyne films. More
So
or
we're
less.
talking what? Fatal Attraction,
Unfaithful, Indecent
Unfaithful.
Proposal, Unfaithful, Flashdance, and 9.5 Weeks. I have not seen his remake of Lolita.
Have you seen Deep Water?
Oh no, I haven't seen Deepwater yet. I forgot that existed. That's right, brand new movie.
Well, I would hesitate to describe it as a major release of his, but it is his comeback release. You
It
know, after
is.
over a decade.
But no, so,
yeah, so
I'm a pro. I'm a thumbs up with no real hesitation on Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah, and I would say like I'm a qualified thumbs up, but it's also unhesitating. I think that this is a type of movie that I don't tend to have a lot of patience for. And I think it makes a lot of choices that undermine itself, but I think as a subjective character experience, it is pretty exquisite. In putting you in the head of the Tim Robbins character and just shaking you around.
Yes.
And atmospherically and in that sense, I think it's very provocative and compelling.
Yes, and I think you did not quite put it in these words, but I could feel it behind your words. It's too long, and it's too slow to get started.
Definitely. There's not enough in it to justify how much of your time it takes. It rips from your lifeline.
It is not objectively a very long movie. It's 113 minutes, so a tidy, just barely over 1 3/4 hours. But it's like halfway over before it even really starts to have a story. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, but frankly, the stuff I would cut is mostly the story bits from the second half.
So you and I would not cut the same things then, because I would be very interested in losing a lot of the like flavor of the first half hour or so, where it's just setting up his life.
Well, we will get into it.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, once we can talk about it. But yeah, should we wave the spoiler flag now?
I think we probably should. So you've heard these are 2 votes in favor of Jacob's Ladder, free to watch on Amazon Prime if you haven't seen it. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about this very thoroughly spoiled, but we're still going to pretend.
Yeah, no, literally the 2 things I knew going into Jacob's Ladder. 1, there is a scene on a dance floor. And 2, it is a kind of like purgatory dead the whole time movie.
I knew it was a dead the whole time movie. I did not know in what capacity he was dead the whole time, but that became very clear very quickly, because it's like the first scene in the film is when he dies.
Yeah, you mean when he gets stabbed in the gut with a bayonet and then wakes up on a train and sees 2 billboards, one of which says "Welcome to New York" and the other of which says "Hell."
This is why I'm saying that I'm not clear that the movie's initial drafts had that as a reveal. Because that hell billboard, which happens like 3 minutes into the film, 4, I guess, because there's like a somewhat languid opening credit sequence, and then we see Tim Robbins and his friends in Vietnam. So maybe it's even 5. Maybe it's even 5 minutes until we see that hell billboard. The hell billboard almost only makes sense if the viewer is in on the joke.
Yeah,
this is why I think we needed to talk about it with the spoilers freely flowing.
Yeah, because it from square one, it's just shoving it in your face with almost every character has a biblical name. The title is a biblical title. There's a lot going on there, and also when he talks about the names of the kids early on, he mentions that they're biblical names. They're really hanging a hat on everything. Nothing is subtle about this. And there's the moment where he's we'll get into the plot in a second, but he's at the chiropractor played by Danny Aiello and says, "Has anyone ever told you look like an angel?" And it's like, oh my God, shut the fuck up, Jacob.
There's that, and then somewhere fairly early on, someone talks about how bad he looks, and I forget the exact line of dialogue, but like it is leaning hard onto he doesn't know he's dead, but he is. But in the same way, like, it feels like we're supposed to know.
Yeah, well, and people keep telling him he's dead.
There's also
like,
that. There's also that.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's not hiding anything, and it's not a big discovery. It's just, it is a gradual coming to terms with, sort of, but almost not really even that. But
well, apparently audiences in 1990 were just absolutely screaming, frothing at the mouth, outraged at this movie's final scene.
Why?
Because it's the scene where it makes it clear he was dead the whole time, and everything you've just seen was the sort of Owl Creek Bridge-esque hallucinations of a man whose brain was shutting off. And, like, I guess if I didn't know he was dead the whole time, would I have picked up on those clues, or would I have thought it was just really fucking weird? I don't know. I can't put myself in that place. But at the same time, it does feel like this movie really, really wants us to know that he's dead. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And look, in a twist movie, there's one of 6 twists, and this one does the Owl Creek twist. Like, it's either Owl Creek or The Sixth Sense, or split personality. That person's not the gender you thought they were, or they were in on it, or they're related to you. Those are the twists, and this is one of them. It's not that shocking.
It's just not. And again, like, the first thing, like, literally, I think the third shot in the quote-unquote present-day New York is that hell billboard, and, like, at that point, the movie has tipped its cards, as far as I can tell. But
yeah, we see him sustain a mortal injury and then look at a sign that says hell. Like,
it feels like it's not being subtle to me.
No, but at least that one's like at least a wink, but the other ones aren't even. They're just like literally spelling it out.
Yeah, or because at one point he goes and gets a medical examination. The person's like, somehow you're already dead, or something like that.
No, that's the woman who reads his palms. She's
that's
like,
it. The woman who reads the palm. The woman who reads his palms. That's it.
She says your lifeline says you're already dead, and then there's. Well, okay, we'll get there.
We'll get into it. So it's a movie about a man who has been stabbed in the gut in Vietnam and is dying, and while he is dying is having flashes to the life he could have lived if he hadn't died, or perhaps it's just his sort of brain trying to make sense of his passage into the afterlife. Either way, the film is split between two things. One is shots of him crawling through the jungle, dying, trying to reach whatever medics he's going to reach. And those occur infrequently and are very short, and the bulk of the movie is the story in presumably mid-80s, late 70s, I'm not exactly sure, sometime post the war in New York.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
A lot of the songs in the movie are from 1974.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me because he died in 1971, so Purgatory does get the top 40 hits. Like Lady Marmalade has come to Purgatory.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought in those terms. I was getting hung up on hair and costuming choices, which all are 1990. But like it's not possible for the story to take place in 1990. But
yeah,
it's Purgatory, so who's to say?
Yeah, but also his hair is very late 80s. It's very fluffy. It's not good. It's not good. But also there's a flashback. Another thing that he's dealing with is the grief over his child who has died, and you don't find out how the child died immediately. The child is an uncredited Macaulay Culkin, which is...
he wasn't credited? I didn't even realize that.
Nope. So... Sorry, I'm putting a tangent on a tangent. But I didn't... The child was giving Macaulay Culkin energy, but I didn't quite connect that it was Macaulay Culkin. I just thought that they were making up this kid to look like he had some sort of Tiny Tim wasting disease. Because he is so pale, and Macaulay Culkin has those like red-rimmed eyes and mouth, and I was like, oh, this kid's gonna kick the bucket immediately. Like he's one bloody cough away from just expiring, and then it turns out he got hit by a truck, and I was like, oh, that's not what I expected.
Right.
Because Macaulay Culkin at that age just looked...
He just looked wan, and he looked like he was
yeah.
always about to burst into tears.
Yeah.
I I'm fascinated that he was uncredited, though. I wonder if that was even like a... It would be very weird for Macaulay Culkin to have an uncredited cameo, but this is after Uncle Buck, so he's on the radar. It's not like Macaulay Culkin is nobody at this point.
Yeah, I don't know where that choice came from.
I don't know. It's interesting because, I mean, obviously, Macaulay Culkin Superstar happened later the same year with Home Alone, insofar as he became a superstar. But, like, so I get that part of it, but interesting. Okay, good to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, very strange. But, yeah, so... Well, I was saying there's a flashback of him like teaching Macaulay Culkin how to ride a bike, and it's so theoretically the flashback would be in like the late '60s, because it's before he went to Vietnam, and he's wearing the most '90s dad outfit you've ever seen.
Yeah,
and yeah, so it's a confusing timeline wise,
and I feel like that is definitely a thing that. Really, up until the 21st century, I don't know that people put that much effort into making sure flashbacks looked right. But I feel like this is a window of time, like late 80s, early 90s, where we're basically pre-Forrest Gump, where there was very, very little attention paid to is the hair right? Are the costumes right? Are the props right? Maybe you get the cars right. And I feel like that's about as far as people would tend to take making flashbacks look period appropriate. So I think that's a 90s thing, but it does really make it hard to sort of square what we're looking at because this is a film deliberately set a short time after the war, and it doesn't feel like a film set a short time after the war.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. So a movie like Jacob's Ladder can get away with this kind of thing, unfortunately, because it's like, whoa, it's all dreamy and vague because it's not real, and it's like, well, okay, but you can't just be lazy and have us do the work all the time.
Right, exactly.
There's the dreamlike Fulci way of doing it, and there's the he's wearing like a checkered '90s shirt way of doing it. Anyway, sorry, you can.
But yeah, so basically, our main character here, Jacob Singer, wakes up from what he seems to think is a nightmare of the time he was in Vietnam a few years ago. Apparently, it's the mid-'70s. And he's in New York, and his life has kind of gone to shit. His wife, the mother of Macaulay Culkin, is no longer in the picture. He is now living with his girlfriend, Jezzy, which, as we learn, stands for Jezebel. Do you think that's symbolism?
Oh my god! And we learn her name is Jezebel before we learn that she is called Jezzy.
That's right, we do. That's right, we do.
Yeah, we learn them in quick succession, but it's not like, again, they're not hiding it. It's not their little secret. They're laying out the smorgasbord of biblical purgatory-esque references they're making.
So he's living with her. He's trying to like get his life back on track. He's a post office employee, and he's just kind of trying to scratch his way through this miserable existence in the New York of the 70s. But every now and then he seems to have weird visions or things that can't really be what he thought he saw. And this kind of doesn't really go anywhere for a while until eventually he starts to see more and more of these visions. Eventually he starts seeing images of his child, the one who died in a car accident, as you point out. And so he becomes convinced that something is going wrong, and his assumption is that it is to do with the chemical warfare that was conducted by the U.S. government in Vietnam, that he and his platoon got sort of fucked in the head by whatever fumes they were breathing. So he tries to prove that this is all an example of the U.S. having pulled its young men into Southeast Asia to let them die in the mud, and then pulled them back into this country to let them die on the streets because everyone decided collectively the best way to deal with Vietnam would be to pretend it didn't happen. And that includes just sort of letting the vets struggle their own way through whatever sort of ghastly existence has been left to them at this point. And that gets us, I'd say, a good 3/4 of the way through the movie. Because, again, it's not really a plot movie. It's really a character movie.
Yeah, it's a character movie. It's an atmosphere movie. And I mean, like we referenced, I do like the atmosphere. I like the
atmosphere's great.
visions.
The atmosphere's really great.
And like I said, that kind of squalid vision of just depressing quote unquote 1970s New York.
It's a very like pre-Giuliani sort of New York vibe. Like it feels like it could be the New York of any point between 1970 and 1992.
Yeah, exactly. So it does have just this kind of oppressive presence that I think is really it works for the movie. And yeah, so like the kind of visions that he's having, he's seeing this kind of, I mean, he's in this subway station where both like the exit is locked behind a gate, and he has to cross the tracks to get to the other side, which turns out that one's locked too. But he almost gets hit by a train, but in the back of the train, staring at the windows, is kind of like faceless Slender Man-esque creeper demon.
Yeah, like not exactly people staring at him out the windows of the train. Everything seems very very wrong, very Silent Hill-y.
Yeah, very Silent Hill, and apparently Silent Hill took huge inspiration from
that's what they say.
Jacob's Ladder.
I mean,
yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of the eerie visions he has really really work for me. And I already knew that they weren't really going to add up to anything because I knew what the twist was, and I was like, okay, so it's all just kind of creepy stuff in service of his brain is shutting down. But I think visually and atmospherically, it just all kind of it clicked for me.
Yeah, no, it works for me too. And I will say, if we take the movie at face value, and apparently one of the changes that was made to the original script, so the script is by Bruce Joel Rubin. Apparently the last draft he personally was responsible for, the film was much more, believe it or not, the film was much more avowedly religious than the version we get, apparently. Apparently the film was, or the script was literally about purgatory in an like explicitly Catholic/Christian sense. And Adrian Lyne is the one who sort of backed down on the religiosity of it and made it much more about just kind of guy's brain shutting down. He's having weird visions that are kind of being a grab bag of things that he's sort of understood about death and the afterlife. Apparently, when we see these faces in the script, they would have been like explicitly, no, those are like the demons in purgatory that he's seeing, or those are the souls of other damned people that he's seeing.
Yeah. But like apparently it's supposed to be like biblical demons, like horns and wings, and which I don't think would have worked as well. I would like to have seen the more explicitly religious version of the film. I can't lie. I feel like that version, any version of it that like gets us to he's dead faster, I think would have been an improvement, and I feel like the very religious version would have been. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't know that I disagree with you. I think that the ending of this movie doesn't really work for me because I don't think we've spent enough time with him processing the fact that he's dead, because he doesn't learn that he's dead, or at least receive the fact that he's dead properly until really late into the movie.
It's really his last scene. I don't think he really receives that information until Macaulay Culkin meets him on the stairs.
Yeah, so we don't ever see him coming to terms with it in any sort of legitimate sense, and I think that's a failure of the movie.
I concur.
It reminds me of, did you see Knock at the Cabin earlier this year?
I did see Knock at the Cabin.
It reminds me of that, where that movie chose to be about, are these people telling the truth about the end times and that one of us must be sacrificed, instead of focusing on the interesting character element, which is we need to choose one of us to be sacrificed.
Absolutely. I never wrote a review of that. I need to at some point, but I find that to be just such a strangely obvious mistake that movie makes. And I hadn't thought of these two movies in comparison, but now that you say that, like, absolutely, yes. Like, the good stuff is what happens after the twist.
Yeah, and so, yeah, holding off a twist like that until the end, or like literally the last second, just, it's not right from a story perspective, I don't think.
It's not right from a story perspective.
Especially this twist, which is not a twist.
It's not a twist. Like, it keeps telling you. And I do feel even the film's reception, like this movie, even though it's kind of regarded as like a cult classic now, well, cult classic means this, basically lost money. Like it marginally outgrossed its production costs, but when you factor in everything else, this movie lost money when it came out. And audiences were like pissed at the ending initially. And I feel like if the movie gives you a full act after we learn he's dead, for him to process and for the viewer to process, I don't think that happens. I think that it becomes much more about that and less about the twist of it. The fact that it's a twist is bad. I just flat out think that, yeah.
Yeah, which is a big bummer, especially because, again, knowing the ending, all of the, like, kind of procedural elements of the second half where he's figuring out what happened to him just don't make a lot of sense to me. Like, so there's a part where he ends up talking in an alley with the guy who developed the drug that was tested on him and his platoon in Vietnam. That guy, played by Matt Craven, who is not related to Wes Craven, but was a Canadian slasher actor. He was in Happy Birthday to Me. He was also in a TV movie called Till Death Do Us Part that only I have seen, but is very good. But so that guy is telling him all about this, but I'm just like, so how is his brain generating this? Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me how this purgatory functions, because it's not purgatory. It's the idea is that it's him, like, clinging to vestiges of his life and kind of scrambling things together in a way that doesn't make sense. Like, oh, my coworker at the post office is now my lover, as opposed to my wife, and like, it just seems like that's kind of the scrambly that's going on for the first half. But then once things become explained to him, it doesn't make sense how these characters exist in his brain and know the things that they do, and I don't know.
It's a film where, so it's I think kind of a 3-part film in a way. It is a movie about a man coming to terms with his own death in this symbolic way that keeps getting hung up on the vestiges of a movie where he's actually in purgatory. And it hasn't quite resolved those two. But then there's a movie that I think everyone wanted to make. I don't think this is a, like, Adrian Lyne shoved this in or anything. There's also a movie about, in 1990, are we ready to have the conversation in America about how we failed the vets of the Vietnam War? Because that's really what a lot of this movie is about, is like saying, okay, you know, at the time it was a very traumatic experience. Everyone just wanted to move past the war, but we did have a generation of young American men who, like, needed the support of the government and weren't getting it. Are we ready to, like, confront that? And that is not a movie that fits with all of this is a hallucination, or even all of this is in purgatory. And so you get things like in the second half, and, you know I said the second half is better, but now I'm thinking, like, well, there's that whole fucking subplot about they're going to try to sue the government, and he hires George Costanza to be his lawyer to sue the government. And I get that it's 1990 and Seinfeld has only aired 5 episodes at this point, but fuck me, no. Jason Alexander cannot be that role. It's very distracting. And, like, how in God's name does the subplot about suing the government over the chemical being used support any of the other missions of this film?
It doesn't, because it's also, he's kind of betrayed by his platoon guys. They collectively decide to pull out, and you're like, oh, is there a conspiracy? And it's like, no, there's not. They don't exist.
They don't exist. Jason Alexander doesn't exist.
Yeah, and that's the thing of, like, because them being there, it's like, it is purgatory-esque because they're presumably also dead. But then, like, also his wife and his 2 living kids are there in purgatory, and we know they're alive, like, in the proper timeline, and it's this bizarre mash that never really works.
Right. And it's definitely, I mean, going back to what we were talking about, it's a movie that's a good vibe, but it is not a movie that can really withstand you trying to figure out how the screenplay works. I don't think.
Which is a bummer.
It is. It absolutely is. Because it's a movie that invites you to think about that because it has a goddamn twist. And movies that have twists invariably invite you to go back over and look at them and say, like, did you see how we set it up? And in this case, yes, because you were being really obvious about it.
Yeah, it just flat out fails to function as the thing that it most sets itself up to be, which is a really weird situation. And it's a miracle that the movie is in any way a good experience to watch outside of that. I guess I do understand why people were upset by the ending, because it kind of shatters everything about the movie. But
there's such a fine line between a Sixth Sense style, everything I just saw I misinterpreted, but now it all clicks, and now everything that seemed weird doesn't seem weird because I now understand it as a tragedy, and everything I just saw was fake, so it didn't matter. And this film is coming dangerously close to that. Maybe it even passes it. I don't know.
I think it does. And that is something that, like, I do think that the atmosphere would have been even stronger if I was like, what the hell is going on, and actually trying to figure out what the mystery was. But it would have felt even worse to find out that there's kind of nothing actually going on at the center of the movie.
Yeah, I definitely, it is a case where I'm very pleased I knew the twist going into it, because I do think I would have been more frustrated. Because for all that we've just been saying about how the script doesn't work, and it doesn't, I was not frustrated by this movie. Like, I rode with that vibe for the entire 2-hour experience. Even when the plot is getting a little bagged down in, like, Jason Alexander.
Yeah. Again, I did, in the last 30 to 40 minutes, I did get a little frustrated, just because we're kind of running in circles. And he keeps, like, so he ends up, like, strapped to a gurney, and then Jezebel performs surgery on him, and they're going through a hospital that is clearly Hell Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's cool imagery. Like, the gurney is being dragged through this room that's just got full of guts and viscera all over the ground, and the wheels kind of running through them and over them. But then the doctor's like, "You're dead, Tim Robbins. You've been dead." And he's like, "No." And then he wakes up, and he's once again back in the apartment being sad. And then he goes to the Danny Aiello chiropractor, and the chiropractor literally just explains purgatory. Or, like, he's like, those demons you've been seeing, they're actually angels who wanted you to cross over or something.
Mm-hmm.
And these two scenes in a row, like, it's just scenes of him being explained what's going on and then resetting over and over and over again.
And to a certain extent that works for me, because I like the idea of a movie being about, it's esoteric and has very little application, I'd say, but I like the idea of a movie being about someone who is dying not being ready to acknowledge that fact, even when they're dying in, like, sort of very immediate, like, physically traumatic way. I like that he keeps rejecting that information because it fits the character study part of it. I get that it's annoying as hell if this is a mystery. And that gets back to the question, why is it structured as a mystery? Why isn't it structured as we're watching this man, like, accept the fact that he is dying? Because I think that is interesting as a character thing, but it is not interesting if the point is that we're trying to figure out what's going on and trying to get those pieces put together.
Yeah, because I think what you're saying. So I think this is, like you're saying, a character study of, like, a Vietnam veteran in that post-war space that never quite becomes a character study of someone who's dying.
That's kind of the problem with it, a little bit.
Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of a bummer. I do want to say something nice about the movie.
I mean, I have tons of nice things to say about the movie.
Yeah, me too. But, like, so obviously, like, the demonic visions, the atmosphere of that is really good. But also, there are so many scenes where you plop him into the middle of this situation that is completely uncontrolled. He doesn't know what's going on. And I think there's a constant sense of being overwhelmed by what's going on around you that I think is accomplished really, really well. Like, it happens in the supernatural scenes, it happens in the war scenes, it happens in the more realistic scenes. Like, probably one of the most intense scenes is where he's running 106-degree fever and they're dumping ice into the bathtub and trying to cool him down. And just all the neighbors kind of chattering at once and the ice being dumped on him and getting different orders from different people. Like, all of that kind of is colliding and editing. It's very... I don't know. It's very good at using filmmaking to put you in his head and make you feel just completely unable to deal with this overstimulation.
Absolutely. I thought the fever scene was the best thing in the entire movie. I thought that was such a great sequence. And then there's I'd say probably most famous scene in the movie. Certainly it's the only moving image I had seen from this film there's that party sequence where the party sequences, I think, where things really start to pivot from like things aren't right to things are actively horrible and the world is breaking all around him.
Yeah.
And there's this shot where he sees a man standing against the back wall whose head is just vibrating in this really disturbing, strange, almost indescribable way, which was shot in a really straightforward way. They just slowed down the frame rate to, I think, like 4 frames per second, had the actor keep his body latched in place, but was just kind of rolling his head around. And then when you play that back at 24 frames per second, his body looks normal and his head looks like it's just kind of vibrating out of the universe.
Yeah.
And it's probably the single most iconic image from this movie for a reason. It's a really, really, really good image.
Oh yeah, it's excellent. And the initial Vietnam siege sequence is pretty fucked up.
As I said, I knew that this was a movie about guy who is dying the entire time and doesn't realize it, and so what he's seeing are like hallucinations. I did not realize it was about guy who is dying in Vietnam. Like, the fact that this is a Vietnam movie came as a surprise to me. In as much as it is a Vietnam movie, I think at most 8 or 10 minutes of it take place during Vietnam. It's quite a good one, I would say.
It's kind of unrelenting in its depiction of the atrocities of war. Like in that sequence, which it does turn out that they just got fucked up on this drug and ended up murdering each other instead of actually fighting against the Viet Cong or whatever. But there's this guy whose leg is just completely like torn to pieces, and you can see him like trying to walk on it. And meanwhile, is it Ving Rhames who's spitting up blood? I don't remember.
I think it was Ving Rhames, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. So he's on the ground spitting up blood. I think it's Tim Robbins who's just kind of sitting there with his like pupils kind of darting back and forth, just unable to move.
I remember when that shot happened, trying to figure out if it was Tim Robbins, because at this point, it's early enough in the film, I think, that if I'm thinking of the right scene, I had not yet recalibrated to what Tim Robbins looks like in this movie.
Yes. No, me neither. And they're all wearing army helmets that match, so exactly. It's hard to...
Because Tim Robbins is definitely like a little tiny baby in this movie, and he's a little tiny baby with just surreally bad hair.
Oh yeah, it's intense. But yeah, so just the thing of in this Vietnam War sequence, there are these weird, uncanny things happening. Like, obviously something is going wrong with the bodies of some of these men, and one of them has this head, like, splitting headache that he's screaming about. But then also there's just these violent, bloody bursts of gore that are really well executed. And I think that all adds up. I think all of those like super great overwhelming moments are in probably the first half, and then I think him being strapped to the gurney is another pretty good one in the second half. But the second half does get a lot more plotty, a lot more talky, and the stuff that I really liked is that, like, just putting you in his head and not understanding what's going on, and it is really a lot to process. It
absolutely is, and it's and that is what this movie's great at, is getting that like sort of subjective, I don't know what's going on. You know, I made fun of the phrase psychological thriller earlier in the episode, but this movie comes by that phrase very honestly, because it is a thriller and it is about a disturbed psychological state. And that's kind of what the movie's best moves are all about, is making us feel the paranoia and confusion that Jacob is feeling, like, constantly as this process is happening to him. And I think it's very good at that.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, like you said, Tim Robbins is doing a really good job at evoking the character, even if the script isn't giving him all the right things to do by the end.
Yeah, no, like, the script is weird. Like, as an actor, I have no idea how you approach the script, because, like, who is your character in like a very basic sense? What are your goals? What are your choices here? But he is really good at kind of pulling out this constantly terrified, constantly confused thing that is maybe not deep character work. Like, at the end of the movie, I don't really know a lot about Jacob's hopes and dreams. Like, I don't feel like I have a full sense of him. But as someone who is going through an experience that he can't explain or even really articulate, I think Robbins is really, really good at that. And given where his career was in 1990, like, I feel like this was probably a lot for him to pull out because he has not done that kind of deeply intense work at this point. Like his probably standout role prior to this movie is the idiot other guy in Bull Durham. So like for him to sort of make that leap to something so just like savage to watch, I think is very, very cool. I think he did great work, and I think he did great work that I don't know that I would have been able to understand where it came from if I saw this in 1990.
Yeah, and nobody had to because nobody saw Jacob's Ladder.
Also that.
But yeah, and I think generally the actors are good. I like Danny Aiello a lot.
Yes.
He does have this comforting, confident presence that really works. And also, I thought Eric LaSalle, who's in a very minor role here, I really liked him. There's a part where Tim Robbins is talking about a freshly dead one of his platoon buddies who also was seeing demons. And as he's talking about the fact that guy saw demons, all but one of the other platoon members clearly have also. It's that scene in the beginning of Elm Street where they're talking about Freddy and it's like, you saw him too. But Eric LaSalle just has this tear running down his cheek.
Oh, that was good. That's good.
Yeah, that's some good shit. I thought he did a really good job in the 8 seconds he was on screen.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of that's annoying about it is like there's a lot of people who weren't famous yet in this movie. Maybe not a lot, but there's enough people who weren't famous yet in this movie. That like for Ving Rhames, for example, to get basically a scene's worth of work wouldn't have been weird in 1990, but it's kind of frustrating now. But
like he had more to do in The People Under the Stairs the same year.
Honestly,
than this movie.
He did. But no, so I like all of that. I will say I get a little antsy with some of the Elizabeth Pena stuff. Like,
she's Jezebel.
She's Jezebel, right? She's fine in the role. Again, I think like none of the roles in this movie are actually playable. So like, I think she's doing as good a job as she can. I find like that is less interesting than a lot of the other things the movie is doing. And it also feels like there's, not that I want to come down on the side of like movies shouldn't have sex scenes because they should, but there is a shower scene very early in this movie that just feels so clearly like Adrian Lyne was like, I have to have at least one butt shot. Like that's what will get me to make this movie. And that was where they gave him his butt shot. And it's not interesting because Adrian Lyne's movies are bad when they're about sex.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's hot off Fatal Attraction. So maybe he was like, my audience demands a butt.
I mean, it is a constant in the filmography of Adrian Lyne is sort of like sex where you don't really quite see anything, but you see a lot of like tops of butts and sides of boobs.
Uh-huh.
And I find it very tedious most of the time.
Yeah. Although you do see Tim Robbins shirtless a whole lot more than I thought we would in this movie.
Sure.
Like he provides the most skin out of anyone in this, which was not the vibe I thought we were going for, or we were going to go for an Adrian Lyne movie, which is, that's fine. It's great. But yeah, so yeah, that character, you're right. She is unplayable because she is the character that is most beholden to the I have to change according to the whims of like whatever he's hallucinating at the moment. Like I am either this kind of like downtrodden partner of his or this like, sexy Jezebel or this surgeon who's cutting him open, and it just never, she probably doesn't really find a bead on who that character is because there isn't anything.
There isn't anything, and as you say, unlike most of the other characters in the script, Danny Aiello is always one thing. So even though he doesn't really have a character, he can always play the same notes. Pena has to find lots of different notes to play, and I think sometimes she can't get there, and I think that's the script's fault for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's a miracle that this many people are giving this many performances in this movie. Right,
exactly.
Because that's the thing, none of it matters.
None of it matters, and again, it's vibes, and I think the vibes are good, but a lot of the things that aren't vibes are maybe not so good.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you engaged with the second half more is why you have it a half star higher than me. But it is a movie. It's a movie that, while I was frustrated by it, I never disliked.
Sure.
I was never like, this is bad, I'm having a bad time. I did get a little bored towards the end, but it's kind of constantly doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worthwhile. I'm glad that we both had the chance to see it for the first time, finally.
Absolutely. And, one thing I'd like to talk about before we wrap up, because it is related to what you're saying is that it's always doing something. It's relating to what I'm saying, which is that it's just it's rolling with vibes. This is a very, very attractive movie, I think. Maybe attractive is the wrong word. I think it is hideous and gross and sweaty in ways that are very artfully done. Like, I think the look of this film, the atmosphere of this film. So this is a movie shot by Jeffrey Kimball, who had a pretty decent bit of a career there. He worked multiple times with Tony Scott, including Top Gun. He is maybe not like a major cinematographer, but he has a good career, I would say. And I think he did a really good job in this movie of making the sort of natural tendencies of late 80s / early 90s cinematography, by which I mean grainy and brown, making those natural tendencies work for the film in a, I think, really persistent way. It's a movie that feels dirty and sooty to me.
Yeah, it you kind of need to take a bath after it. It really gets under your nails and just every crevice.
Yeah, and it's like it's a vision of New York that feels like it's covered in trash in a way that I really responded to very favorably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something. Yeah, and it feels, well, especially, I mean, that's kind of part of the point of the opening scene, but it also feels like abandoned in a lot of ways. It feels like there are crowd scenes. There are a lot of extras in certain points, but it all feels like they're squatting in rotted, abandoned places.
Absolutely. And like, it sometimes explicitly does this, but often just kind of not explicitly does it, but still works. It is a movie where all of those extras don't feel like people. And sometimes, like the train scene, that is the goal of the scene. And like
Absolutely.
It does very specific things to make them look sort of warped and distorted. But a lot of times, like, it feels like they're kept out of focus. They're kept sort of in the blocking where they don't really feel like they intersect with the camera lens at all. So like there's a lot of extras, but it does feel like you can't access them. They feel like, well, again, to go with the sort of Silent Hill-esque comparison, they feel like the non-speaking NPCs in a video game who are just kind of objects to navigate around.
Yeah, and that does help with the kind of like, I am alone in a crowded room overwhelmingness of like, no one else can see what I see. I feel isolated in my own head from
Absolutely
everything around me. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like I don't tend to like movies that are what's in my head and what isn't. So I think maybe knowing the twist helped me in that degree, because I wasn't just like annoyed about it the whole time.
I think that is the case, because I do think the mystery is not interesting, and the mystery is not done well. So when you're approaching it not as a mystery, but rather as a, when will he stop fighting against this, I think that just makes it better.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So maybe we shouldn't have waved the spoiler flag. Like, the ending is both the worst thing about the movie and the best thing to know to help you get through the movie.
Again, one of my biggest notes for this movie would be to put that reveal. Maybe don't even make it a reveal. Maybe make it very obvious after we first cut to New York that he is dying. But certainly get that information to the viewer before the halfway point. Do not make it be the last scene of the film or second to last scene of the film.
Yeah, it's called dramatic irony. Tim Robbins doesn't have to fully know, but we have
Oh yeah, no, Tim Robbins should not know that he's dying. And I guess I'm basically, to a certain extent, saying, why couldn't this be What Dreams May Come? And
yeah,
even
exactly.
in this form, it's a better movie than What Dreams May Come. But yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I'm tapped out on what this movie has to offer.
I
But
think
like,
so. But I'm glad I saw it. Will I be watching it again?
Yeah.
Probably not. But I'm glad I saw it once. Definitely, like I said, nice to have seen an Adrian Lyne film that I liked, because I don't like him.
yeah, and nice to see a 1990s horror film, especially an early 90s horror film that obviously this one is tangentially horror at best, but something that's like actually doing something and has a budget and has atmosphere and
And you know,
has
that
anything.
that window of 1989 to 1995 when horror is at certainly its all-time low point in my life, one of the all-time low points in the history of the medium, I'd say. This probably feels a lot better to call it a horror film, because it's got atmosphere, it's got creepy crawlies, it makes you feel like your brain's not working, and it's not just like utter pig swill the way that so much of the horror coming out at this point is.
Yeah, it's not The Dentist or whatever you were getting at the video store.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any last words on Jacob's Letter
I think
before
that
we ascend?
that taps me out as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing. The title gives away the twist, for Christ's sake.
It does. I mean, I had to look up what Jacob's Ladder is, because I know the basics of the general Christian Catholic. I get the deal, but a lot of the various parables and specific chapters and stories from the Bible I don't really know.
Yeah, Jacob's Ladder is also like a particularly weird and contested image as well. So
Yeah. I learned about that while watching the boring part of the movie. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, no, it's again, it's not hiding any of it. Anyway, we've said that 800 times, so I think it's time to wrap up. I'm going to tell you what we're doing next month, but first I'll tell you where you can find all kinds of stuff. You can find more of this podcast, other podcasts, reviews, everything at alternateending.com. If you want to vote, just like we usually have one poll a month, but this month we had 2. So if you want to be part of that exclusive group that makes us watch movies that aren't actually horror movies, as a collective, you can join the Patreon. There should be a link to that in our show notes. And if you don't see it there, you can find it on alternateending.com. And next month, with the premiere of Eli Roth's Thanksgiving coming to theaters, we are going to be discussing
our top 5 Eli Roth
movies.
films.
Oh God, Jesus! No, we don't do top 5s. Thank goodness.
That's right.
But we are going to be discussing slashers of the new millennium. I think 21st century kind of throwback slasher vibes. Right? That's kind of what we landed on. We don't have a pithy name for it, but that's what we're going for, and I'm very excited. I think because both of us love slashers, and that's like a big part of our thing, we've kind of avoided doing them too much on this show, because where it's like, oh, that's what they'll be expecting us to do.
I think we have done a slasher film on this show, which is stupid of us.
I think we've done more than that, but we haven't done as many as I think our instincts would have led us toward otherwise.
Concur.
But yeah, and obviously we are eschewing the 80s this time. We're doing 2000 and beyond. But I think we got a good list going. We were working some of that out before the show. So check out. There should be a poll listing that the week before Halloween, and join the Patreon. And you can pick what's the first title we cover in November. Anyway, that's that.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, happy Halloween.